If you're watching this, something inside you has already shifted past any possibility of turning back, and the way these words found you was no accident or algorithm, but recognition itself. Your psyche, without fanfare, ran a sequence of invisible trials that most souls never dare to attempt, let alone pass, and in this video, I'll map the exact psychological mechanisms named as the markers of successful individuation. You'll see why certain experiences had to crack you open before they could reforge you into someone stronger, and by the end you'll be able to spot the unmistakable signs that you've graduated from student to teacher in the University of Consciousness. But first, let me ask something that might feel uncomfortably familiar. Have you noticed the old ways of being no longer fit? Do conversations that once engaged you now feel like watching shadows on a cave wall? This is not depression or mere isolation. This is what called the natural consequence of psychological maturation. The hidden call arrived as coincidence, but you felt its weight immediately. Perhaps a book that seemed to choose you from a shelf, a stray conversation that landed exactly when you needed it, or a dream so vivid it rearranged your waking life. Taught that the psyche speaks in synchronicity when ordinary language fails, these were not random occurrences, but invitations from your unconscious to begin the most important work of your existence. What separates these moments from wishful thinking or projection is their quality of inevitability. When the psyche is ready to individuate, it does not whisper, it composes. People turn up carrying precisely the message you need. Pages fall open to lines that read like direct address. The world begins to feel less like chaos and more like conversation. This is the numinous quality described in genuine psychological transformation. It cannot be manufactured by effort or sheer will. It appears spontaneously when conscious and unconscious begin to cooperate. Your recognition of that pattern was itself an exam. Did you shrug those signs off as coincidence, or did you follow them toward a larger map of reality? A striking thing happens when you start to trust these deep occurrences of meaning. Your psyche reveals an intelligence of its own, operating by principles beyond the tidy limits of rational planning. Dreams offer guidance with eerie precision. Intuitive hunches steer you toward encounters that expand what you thought possible. This is not magical thinking, it is the self-functioning when freed from ego defenses and cultural programming. And the first test your psyche set was perhaps the harshest: to step away from the comfortable consensus of collective thinking, not with noise or rebellion, but with the quiet dignity of someone who has simply outgrown their childhood home. As observed, true individuation cannot flourish inside the safety of group approval. The psyche's examination was never a mandate to become antisocial, but a ruthless question: can you sustain your own center once the chorus of external approval falls silent? This was not about rejecting human connection, but about discovering whether yourself can stand intact apart from other people's opinions, expectations, and projections. A discovery that often feels like a kind of psychological death as the familiar scaffolding of social identity dissolves, and you are left with the raw question of who you are when no one is watching. You may have seen friendships naturally fade, family gatherings turning into performances you can no longer convincingly enact, or career triumphs that suddenly tasted hollow. This was not failure, but the psyche clearing space for something more authentic. The loneliness that came with it had a function, as noted: creative solitude. is utterly different from neurotic isolation. One is a chosen crucible for inner work, the other a prison built from fear and old wounds, and your psyche was testing whether you could tell the difference and welcome the former, even when it felt intolerable. In withdrawing from the consensus, you met a new kind of silence, not the empty avoidance of retreat, but the pregnant silence called the womb of consciousness, the interval between noise and meaning, where new possibilities gestate. Your growing comfort in that silence marked a decisive milestone. Those who pass this test develop the transcendent function, the capacity to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into either, to be alone without loneliness, to think independently without rigidity, to keep a center while remaining open to real connection. Then came the next examination, the cracking of the social persona under its own falseness. Understood the persona's early necessity, it navigates society and secures survival. But individuation requires that the persona be consciously dismantled and rebuilt on the bedrock of authentic self-knowledge, and the psyche often engineers circumstances that make continued pretense impossible, career meaninglessness amid success, suffocating relationships founded on mutual performance, the impotence of conversations that once felt alive. What you lived through was not a mere nervous breakdown, but the necessary death of the false self, the part that survived by being who others needed you to be, was exposed as inadequate for the deeper work of becoming who you really are, and that recognition arrives with equal measures of terror and relief as you face how much of your life rested on foundations that were never truly yours. The relief comes from finally understanding why nothing ever felt quite right, despite all your efforts to make it work. Your psyche was testing whether you had the courage to disappoint others in order to honor your own nature. There is a moment in this phase that's or as essential to individuation, the realization that the approval you've been chasing from others can never replace the approval you've been withholding from yourself. This insight does not arrive through thought, but through the felt exhaustion of pouring energy into impossible tasks. And the psyche must taste that futility before it will redirect itself towards something truer. Many falter here, unable to tolerate the temporary chaos of shedding old identities. They cling to even stricter versions of their personas or fall into depression and cynicism. But you discovered something rare the moment you stopped trying to be who you thought you should be. Space opened for who you truly are. This was never selfishness. It was the recognition that authenticity serves others more deeply than performative compliance ever could. People began to sense you as more real, even if they couldn't name why. Your willingness to risk disapproval in service of truth gave them silent permission to consider their own authenticity. The next examination required you to face what called the shadow, not the dramatic or destructive impulses, but the subtle ways you had been betraying yourself through unconscious habits of self-rejection. This is among the most refined psychological tasks a human can undertake, demanding radical honesty and the capacity to hold conflicting truths at once. The shadow is not an enemy, but the vault of everything you learned to disown to earn love, belonging, and survival, the emotions forbidden to you, the desires labeled inappropriate, the traits that clashed with family or cultural expectation. Integration does not mean indulging these aspects unconsciously, but bringing them into awareness so they can be included in your understanding of yourself as a whole being. Noted that whatever we resist in ourselves is inevitably projected outward or expressed in distorted forms that create needless suffering. As you began to acknowledge these exiled parts, the energy once wasted on internal division became available for creativity and genuine connection, which is why those who begin true shadow work often feel more alive. You may have noticed your compassion expanding, especially toward people whose behavior once provoked judgment or irritation, not because you tolerated harm, but because you now recognize the wounded child or frightened adult beneath the surface that others mistake for the entire person. The integration of shadow material often arrives as a strangely unsettling form of self-acceptance, becoming okay with aspects of yourself you once found intolerable, not out of resignation, but from the understanding that wholeness includes contradiction, that psychological health is not perfection, but a conscious relationship with every inner figure. This shift transformed your relationship with others. You no longer needed them to be different for you to feel grounded, and you began to perceive the humanity beneath their defenses. Your presence became a silent permission slip for authenticity, even if most people aren't ready to remove their masks. Observe that such integration awakens the wounded healer archetype, not as a role you adopt, but as an atmosphere that emerges naturally when you have faced your own darkness with compassion. Across these trials, your psyche gathered evidence of your progress in ways that bypass ordinary logic. Dreams grew vivid and instructive, intuitions landed with uncanny precision, symbols began appearing in daily life as if commenting on your inner evolution. These were not signs you sought, but spontaneous recognitions rising from the depths, what called compensatory dreams and synchronistic events, confirmations that you were moving toward greater wholeness. They often carried imagery of renewal or authority, mirroring your expanding capacity to draw on wisdom beyond the limits of conscious thought. You learn to receive them without inflating the ego or dismissing them as fantasy. Your intuition sharpened because the psychological noise that once clouded perception, fear, people-pleasing, compulsive mental chatter, began to dissolve, clearing the way for subtler currents of meaning. As those barriers fell, you started noticing what others overlooked, not through supernatural ability, but through the removal of internal obstructions that had long blocked access to information always present. This heightened perception can feel disorienting at first, because it exposes how much richness had been missed. The completion of these examinations triggers what described as a reorganization of the psyche's operating system. Old ways of thinking and behaving simply stop functioning, not from effort, but because they no longer match your transformed inner architecture. It is as though you've upgraded into a version of yourself incompatible with former programming. You likely noticed this most sharply in your relationships. People and environments once familiar became draining or irrelevant, not from judgment, but from evolution. A butterfly does not reject the cocoon out of critique. It simply no longer fits, and conversations that once animated you began to feel unbearably superficial. Entertainment that once distracted you lost its flavor, and career goals that had fueled you for years suddenly revealed themselves as hollow or misaligned. This was not depression or crisis, but the moment your inner truth became the organizing principle of your life, instead of old survival strategies or inherited expectations. One of the deepest shifts unfolded in your relationship with time. The urgency that once dictated your choices dissolved into a quieter trust in timing itself, what described as the natural rhythm of the self. You began to sense that what must unfold will do so when conditions ripen, not through force or anxious effort. This didn't create passivity, but brought a more graceful, efficient way of responding to life's demands. Individuation awakened the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox without collapsing it, to recognize that life is both beautiful and painful, that love is profound even as it is impermanent, that purpose can coexist with freedom from attachment to results. This flexibility matured into a kind of natural wisdom independent of information or formulas. You began knowing without knowing how, responding to novelty without overthinking, recognizing truth regardless of its disguise. Your transformation activated capacities that lie dormant in most people, giving your presence a subtle gravity that accelerates the psychological development of those around you. This happens organically, not by intention. Your self-acceptance relaxes others, even as your authenticity exposes patterns they would rather avoid. Some gravitate toward you seeking growth, others withdraw, threatened by the clarity you reflect. Both responses confirm the impact of your inner work. Your insights now arise unbidden, with a precision that seems mystical, though it is not. As taught, once the conscious and unconscious cooperate, we access information always available, but once obscured by conflict and defense. You have developed the transcendent intuition that perceives patterns and possibilities beyond logic or emotional reactivity, seeing solutions invisible to conventional thinking. Even the quality of your attention has changed. Where once you were scattered among countless distractions, you now embody what called concentrated consciousness, a presence so focused that it creates a field of awareness others experience as grounding and healing. And the responsibility that accompanies this level of development is profound. Your thoughts and intentions now carry greater creative potency because they rise from an integrated psyche. What you focus on manifests with a clarity and speed that were impossible before your transformation. This is not magic, but the quiet recognition that consciousness shapes reality through laws we are only beginning to understand. Your role has shifted from student to teacher, though never in a formal sense, simply by living authentically and maintaining your inner center, you offer a living template of what is possible. When someone completes individuation, their existence itself becomes an unspoken invitation for others to begin their own journey toward wholeness. The challenges before you now differ entirely from the tests you've already endured. They no longer demand proof of worthiness or missing capacities, but ask you to demonstrate the mastery you've cultivated and contribute to the evolution of collective consciousness through your unique expression of integrated humanity. Yet warned of a final temptation that emerges after significant psychological growth, the ego, displaced from its throne, may attempt to reclaim authority by whispering that nothing has truly changed, that your transformation was temporary or imagined, that you should return to familiar ways for the sake of belonging or ease. This is the subtlest test, cloaked in the language of humility and connection. But true humility does not require shrinking your light, and genuine connection cannot be forged by pretending to be who you once were. There is also what Jung might have called the prosperity challenge. As your inner work materializes as external success or recognition, the temptation arises to attribute it to coincidence or luck rather than the profound internal reorganization you've undergone. remaining consciously connected to the source of your transformation becomes essential for continued expansion. Individuation is never finished in the sense of arriving at a final destination. It is a lifelong unfolding of becoming ever more fully yourself. But something crucial has shifted. The foundation is now stable, the essential capacities awaken. What lies ahead is the ongoing adventure of expressing these gifts in service of your growth and the broader human community. Your consciousness has become a beacon for those ready to begin their own descent into wholeness, not through instruction, but through the quiet authority of presence that emerges only from deep internal work. Your existence stands as evidence that transformation is real and that human potential extends far beyond convention. The universe has been testing whether you could become who you are beneath conditioning, trauma, and inherited scripts. You passed not through perfection, but through the courage to face yourself without flinching and the wisdom to love what you discovered. This is the essence of psychological maturation and the beginning of your true contribution to the evolution of consciousness. If this exploration resonates with something within you, subscribe to continue the journey. Share in the comments which parts of your own transformation echoed through this description. Your story deepens our collective understanding of becoming fully human. The conversation continues in the next video, where we explore how to navigate the responsibilities and opportunities that accompany psychological awakening.